What if a single word could strip away everything you were, your honor, your family's respect, your place in society, and even your right to live? Among the Norse, that word was argr. To the modern ear, it might sound like an insult, but in the Viking world, it carried the weight of a death sentence. It was more than a slur. It was a formal accusation that branded a man unfit to exist among honorable warriors. In Viking society, masculinity was not simply a cultural expectation. It was the foundation upon which law, kinship, and spiritual authority were built. Honor was the currency of life, and manhood fierce, violent, and unwavering was its guarantor. To be called argr, often translated as unmanly, cowardly, or morally corrupt, meant that everything defining your place among the Norse could be shattered in a single breath. The Icelandic Grágás law codes show how deeply society feared the word. Being branded argr was not just offensive, it was legally actionable. The insult was considered a nith, a dishonor so serious that the accused had to respond or risk annihilation. A man accused of such shameful behavior could not simply laugh it off. If he ignored the charge, he was assumed guilty, and the consequences reached far beyond humiliation. At its heart, argr accused a man of violating the sacred ideals of Norse masculinity. This could mean cowardice in battle, adopting a passive role in same-sex relations, or practicing sorcery, specifically seithr, the type of magic often performed by women. To the Norse, such acts inverted the natural order. Women could use seithr without dishonor, but when men turned to it, they crossed into dangerous territory, accused of weakness, corruption, and unmanliness. Even Odin, the Allfather himself, was not immune to such suspicion. The Inglingr saga notes how other gods mocked him for practicing seithr, declaring it so shameful that men could not deal with it without disgrace. If Odin could be tainted, what chance did a mortal have? The moment a man was called argr, he faced a choice: prove his honor or be destroyed. The proper response was the holmgang, a ritual duel. Before the eyes of witnesses, steel and blood would settle the question of a man's worth. Refusing to fight was tantamount to admitting guilt. And once guilt was assumed, the man was marked, stripped of the law's protection, and cast into one of the harshest punishments of the Norse world: outlawry. Outlawry was not simply exile, it was the deliberate unraveling of a man's humanity. There were two forms. The lesser, known as fjorborgsskadr, lasted 3 years. A condemned man could return after this period if he survived his wandering and committed no further crimes. But the greater form, skóggangr, literally going into the forest, was permanent. It meant death by isolation. To be sentenced to skóggangr was to be declared outlawr, outside the law. You could not seek shelter, food, or protection. No household could take you in. Family who dared to help risked their own standing. You were denied the right to trade, to sacrifice at temples, or to attend assemblies. If found within inhabited lands, anyone could kill you, and not only would they face no punishment, they might even be praised for removing a stain upon society. Imagine it, a man stripped of everything, driven into the wilderness with nothing but the clothes on his back and the knowledge that his former neighbors now had the legal right to hunt him. The forests and fjords of Scandinavia were not gentle. Long winters, scarce food, and prowling predators turned the land itself into an enemy. Even for a skilled warrior, survival in such conditions was almost impossible. The sagas preserve haunting echoes of these fates. Grettir's saga tells of Grettir Asmundarson, condemned to outlawry. For years he wandered in isolation, surviving in caves, stealing when he could, always hunted, never safe. His tale is one of slow destruction, not just of body, but of mind and spirit. That is the essence of outlawry. It was designed not merely to kill, but to erase. And yet, the cruelty of the punishment lay not only in physical suffering. A man sent into the forest was already considered dead to his community. No funeral rites would be performed for him, no songs sung in his memory. He would not join his ancestors in the halls of the honored dead. Instead, his soul was thought to linger, unmoored, forgotten, and polluted by shame. Death by sword was honorable. Death by skóggangr was obliteration. This punishment reveals how the Norse bound law and identity so tightly to honor. Other societies of the medieval world had exile, but few practiced such absolute social execution. In Rome, a senator might face exile, yet still live with wealth in another land. In China, banishment was cruel, but the exiled often maintained some ties of family or record. The Viking version was far harsher. It was annihilation of memory, kinship, and manhood all at once. So when a man was called argr, he was not merely insulted. He stood at the edge of a precipice, where one wrong choice could cast him into the wilderness as less than a man, less even than a beast. In Norse law, he was as a wolf in the forest. That was not metaphor, it was legal fact. To kill him was no crime, to forget him was a duty. This was the terror of arg, a single word that could unravel everything. And for the Vikings, to be unmanly was worse than death. To be cast out as an outlaw was not simply a punishment, it was a ritual of dehumanization. Once labeled outlawry, a man was no longer a member of the human world. The law itself described him as vargr vium, a wolf in sacred places. This was more than poetic language. It meant he was now an animal in the eyes of society, stripped of rights, kinship, and the bonds that made him a man. Anyone could kill him without consequence. And often, doing so was considered an act of civic duty. This transformation was terrifying because it inverted the Norse view of identity. In a culture where manhood was sacred and honor was the very essence of life, to be declared argr and cast into the forest was to be reduced below even the status of a thrall, a slave. Slaves at least had value. The outlaw had none. He was the walking dead, hunted not for justice but for purification of the community. The dishonor, however, did not end with the man himself. It spread like a stain through bloodlines. Norse society was built on kinship networks, clans that carried honor across generations. To belong to a family of warriors was to inherit prestige, protection, and opportunity. But if one member was condemned as needing a dishonored man, he threatened to drag the entire family down with him. Families often disowned their disgraced sons, not because they lacked love, but because survival demanded it. To be linked by blood to an unmanly man could poison marriage prospects, inheritance rights, and standing at the great assembly. The sagas and genealogies reflect this brutal logic. Unlike fallen warriors, whose names lived on in carved stones and in the songs of poets, those deemed unmanly were erased by design. Their names were deliberately omitted from family records, their deeds left unspoken. In Icelandic genealogical texts, it is common to find gaps where such figures should have appeared. It was as if they had never existed. To forget was an act of self-preservation. This practice was not unique to the Norse. Across the world, cultures have tried to erase the memory of those they considered polluted. In ancient Rome, the practice was called damnatio memoriae, the condemnation of memory. Emperors who fell from grace had their names chiseled from monuments, their statues smashed, their legacies rewritten. In ancient Egypt, pharaohs like Akhenaten, who defied religious tradition, had their names and images destroyed to sever them from eternity. The Vikings, however, carried this practice into the marrow of family life. Forgetting a disgraced man was not only the work of kings or priests, but of parents, brothers, and kin. And so, the punishment of argr reached far beyond death. A man could be erased from his own bloodline, denied the immortality of memory. To the Norse, remembrance was everything. They recited their ancestry with pride, tracing noble roots back through generations. A man's honor lived on in stories told around fires and carved into runestones. Even death on the battlefield was sweetened by the certainty that his name would be spoken. But the Nathing was denied this. His name was not carved, his story was not sung. His existence was not only ended, but intentionally unmade. Think of the cruelty. To die is one thing, but to be forgotten by your kin, by your people, by history itself, is to die a second death. To be condemned as unmanly was to be condemned to oblivion. And yet, this obsession with honor, memory, and masculinity tells us something deeper about the Viking world. It reveals their fear that weakness, corruption, or deviation from their masculine ideal could unravel society itself. A single man's dishonor threatened the entire order. By erasing him, they believed they were protecting the community, the bloodline, and even the future. But what echoes does this leave for us today? Every culture has ways of defining who belongs and who does not, who is worthy of remembrance and who should be cast out. The Vikings made their judgments through outlawry and erasure. Modern societies do it differently, but the impulse remains familiar. As the Havamal reminds us, cattle die, and kinsmen die, and so one dies oneself. But a noble name will never die if good renown one gets. For the Vikings, to be remembered with honor was the only immortality that mattered. To lose that was worse than death. To be called argr was not just to lose life, it was to lose eternity.